Hi everyone, and welcome to this seminar, Online Communication on COVID, which is being hosted by the College of Art, Social Science and Commerce at Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia, as part of a series that we're doing here looking at the impact of COVID-19 on all of our lives. My name's Lawrie Zion, and before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this event and our participants are located, our Australian participants are located on the lands of many traditional custodians in Australia. We recognise their ongoing connection to the land and value their unique contribution to the university and wider Australian society. We're committed here at La Trobe to providing opportunities for Indigenous Australians, both as individuals and communities, through teaching and learning, research and community partnerships across all our campuses and online. We pay our respects to our Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to any Indigenous participants joining us online today, wherever you are. Well, many people, including me, have found themselves moving their work and social lives online in 2020. We've all acquired a new pandemic vocabulary and learnt to navigate new online etiquette, or have we? What do these changes mean, and how well can we interpret our worlds when so much of our traditional one-to-one communication is so radically altered? So we're going to bounce this topic around today with a couple of great guests. Jane Solomon is a lexicographer and emoji expert based in Oakland, California. Jane's currently Senior Emoji Lexicographer, what a cool title, for Emojipedia, and has worked for dictionary.com and projects with Oxford, Cambridge and HarperCollins. Jane's also the author of the children's book, The Dictionary of Difficult Words. And also joining us, Dr. Lauren Gawne, who's a linguist at La Trobe University, specialising in emoji and gesture alongside documentation of the grammar of Tibetan languages in Nepal. Lauren's also co-host of Lingthusiasm, a must-listen podcast that's enthusiastic about linguistics and where you'll learn so much about the way we talk every day. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're taking some questions during this forum in about 20 minutes. For people in the audience, just please use the Q&A function that I think you can see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to join in, just type a question in there. We'll be reading them out rather than crossing over to you directly in person due to the logistics of Zoom. But we hope to get to lots of questions through this discussion. So Lauren and Jane, I was going to start by asking, how's your ISO going? A few months ago, no one would have had any idea what I'm talking about. And Jane, I'm not sure you do know what I'm talking about if I use a term like ISO.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've heard ISO for isolation. But I mean, maybe other people in the United States use it. I haven't heard it though.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I have seen some people jokingly call it core, like quarantine, a shortening of that, but I haven't seen ISO really. I mean, this does not mean that people aren't using it, because I have a 3-month-old baby, so my experience of the pandemic is the experience of like being a little bit more unplugged from things than I usually am, and a little bit more ISO'd than usual.
If we take the ISO out of the question, it still seems like a funny question at the moment to ask someone how they're going. This innocent sort of way of establishing contact with someone now feels so loaded. I'm wondering if you could both tell us what you think about the way that the pandemic shaped even the kind of everyday greeting.
I've been thinking a lot about how I never really understood like 18th and 19th century letter writers who would start with this, "Dear good sir, I hope this letter finds you and your family in good health and that everything is going fine." And now I really feel myself opening emails with these kind of very long-winded, like, I don't want to presume that everything is fine with you, but I also have this thing that I need to ask you. This type of greeting where we often don't really want to know how someone is or how they're going, to be very Australian about it. It's just a kind of step in the dance that we do to start the conversation. And these are known as phatics in linguistics. We don't even really think of them as having a lot of content. And normally they don't. We can get through a day very easily by saying, how are you? I'm fine. We see this kind of routine in all of the world's languages. And then suddenly you have a situation like this where you can't presume that the standard rule book of greetings and leave takings work anymore. And it's been very interesting watching new norms arise. Jane, I don't know how you have started greetings in emails now.
If someone asks me how I am, and I just will mindlessly say, okay, but then I'll back up and say, okay, considering, and all the things going on, and not just the pandemic. Obviously in the United States, there's a huge issue with cops killing Black people. And, you know, this weighs on the United States a lot. I mean, I've seen protests all over the world. So it's asking someone, how are they? They're probably not doing, you know, the same as they would if we weren't in a pandemic, if all this wasn't going on. So yeah, I think okay and fine have taken on new meanings in light of that because of this collective suffering that's happening right now. For sure, it definitely, you think twice about asking someone how they are. You're like, should I even ask?
The weird thing is, statistically, if you think about how many days you really feel like you can honestly answer fine, it makes you realize just how much of a performance the role of these greetings and leave takings are. It's just that now we know we can assume the other person is probably not okay. And that's what's made us rethink the rule book on this.
So my husband is British and he lives in the US with me. And when at some point I was like, do you know, like I would, you know, something Americans say a lot is like, what's up? And the response, there's like a set response. And so after like a few years of him living here, I said, do you know what the set response is to what's up in the United States? And he made some sort of response, and it was not it. The set response is pretty much like, what's up? Not much. You say not much, no matter what is going on. And so, yeah, now when someone asks you how you are, people are actually thinking and maybe responding to reflect how everything is. Yeah.
So how do we cope with that, using language in the way we've traditionally used it? Is it better to, if you're in a Zoom meeting, just to start proceedings? What do you do when you're chatting to people on Facebook? Is there something in particular that we're not able to do as well as we could because we're not seeing people face to face as much as we used to?
Well, I think what Lauren suggested is a pretty good idea. Make no assumptions of what someone's state is when you're contacting them, and think about that. Consider that when you are greeting them.
I'm also interested in how we're kind of seeing evolving norms and behaviors. So I feel like at the start of the kind of pandemic wave, there was a lot of very elaborate, I hope you're well, I don't want to presume, I'm sorry, especially in business emails, these kind of very long preambles before going, do that job I asked you to do, or more politely. And then we kind of got to a point where it was almost politer in business context to just do a, hi, I won't presume to ask how you are, and just move on and kind of not impose upon someone this very long-winded, I hope you're okay. And then I feel like since we've now added a kind of American and potentially global reckoning with the role of racism in policing and governance, we've kind of returned to the more overt not wanting to impose upon people. And so it's kind of been going in cycles depending on where different groups of people are at emotionally with the tsunami of events that is 2020. Hopefully no tsunamis. That would be too much on top of everything.
It would indeed. What about the from your own expertise in looking at how people understand complex terms? How well are people actually able to take in the language around emergencies and warnings and health communication? And how much is determined by socioeconomic factors and geographic factors?
Jane, are you brave enough to
that's a big question. So in terms of like the language of pandemic, I mean, there are some words that have not been used very much that are suddenly very, very relevant. Like, in fact,
pandemic itself.
Yeah, I mean, unless you were maybe playing a board game, you're probably not talking about pandemics if you live in the US at least, unless that was your field of study or work. But yeah, it's interesting because you have quarantine and you have self-isolation and ISO, and then you also have social distancing, and these are three distinct things. And then at least in California, and I don't know about in Australia, I started to hear elected officials use physical distancing instead of social distancing because it's a more direct term and it actually describes what they're asking people to do. I've seen all three of these used interchangeably, but you know, social distancing, physical distancing, these are more preventative staying at home initiatives, whereas quarantine and self-isolation have very specific uses, but I've been seeing them used interchangeably. And I think, you know, you can't stop people using language how they want to use it, and how, like, we have no control over the words and the definitions and where they go. They'll go where they go, but in a health case, in a public health case, sometimes it can be harmful if people are using the words in a different way, because there's, you know, at first when not everyone in at least, you know, in certain areas were social distancing or physical distancing, and using quarantining to describe it, it suggested that they had been exposed, which is a very different thing than staying home to you know, flatten the curve. Another term that has come about in this time.
Yeah. What about emojis in the context of messaging and the use? You're both experts in this area. I've never used emojis until now, so I'm a newbie with this. But to what extent do they become important communication tools at a time like this?
I think that they are just another part of the communicative repertoire that we have, and a particularly useful one now that we're more likely to be communicating with people through work or socially using digital channels like this Zoom webinar. Webinar is definitely a word I've used 10,000 times more often this year than previous years. But I think it's been very interesting, these emoji that have languished in obscurity, the microbe that looks a lot like a coronavirus on the Apple platform, and the face mask emoji. I've had a lot of people say, oh wow, the emojis have made a face mask one, that's really great, but it was actually part of the original set. We just haven't had a culture of using face masks preventatively in Western contexts, and it's languished unused, particularly until now. So they are just one of the resources that we have. Jane, I don't know if you've noticed any other emoji getting a lot of love right now.
Yeah, well, hand washing emoji. So any combination of emoji that can suggest hand washing. It could be the hands like maybe clapping, or the hands praying, and then maybe a soap emoji, maybe drops of water. All of these can suggest hand washing. And I think in terms of what is the power in using emoji to talk about these serious health issues is that it makes it accessible, and it makes it visual as well, so that the ideas can be communicated in more than one culture, because hand washing looks pretty much the same for anyone across the world. There's going to be, you know, movement of hands, friction of hands, and probably some liquid, maybe some soap. So these are things that make it so people feel, maybe in some ways emoji are this lighthearted medium. So it allows you to talk about things in a more gentle way sometimes than, like, there could be maybe a joking tone where you're like, but remember to wash your hands seriously. So these are things that emoji help people express.
It's hard with, yeah, I was going to say, it's hard with written only communication. You lose a lot of the things that we can use in spoken communication, like softening your tone, and it's hard, you know, wash your hands. You can sound bossy if you don't have any way to kind of soften and, as Jane said, make it a bit more lighthearted. So emoji are a useful reinforcing and kind of softening tool in the tone of written communication.
And I would say beyond even like emoji, there have been memes about washing hands. So there's this, this health poster that has all the steps of properly washing your hands, and the suggestion to sing happy birthday 2 times, because you're supposed to do it for 30 seconds. I don't know if in Australia they say happy birthday 2 times, but that's what they say in the US.
Hilariously, I've only seen the meme version. I didn't know that was the original.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this is like what the CDC is saying. This is what, people at the top of the government are saying, like, sing happy birthday 2 times while washing your hands, 30 seconds. And so people started plugging in their own lyrics, because who wants to actually sing happy birthday every time you wash your hands? And so that's become a whole meme where you have this informational health poster that then the words have been swapped out. So people are having fun with it. I mean, there's, on the internet, you can see with emoji and with memeing of these serious issues, people are trying to have a sense of humor about it. But I think I saw more of that at the beginning of the pandemic. And, I at least for me, as death counts mounted, as more and more people died, I think people were realizing how serious it is and joking less about it as a whole.
Yeah. Do you think that there's something particularly appropriate about emojis, given that this pandemic it's being experienced differently in different parts of the world, but we are all experiencing it? So in a sense, does it make more sense to be engaging in communication through emojis in certain contexts than trying to second guess whether the dominance of English is going to prevail in the audience that we're trying to connect with, or people are able to read and write to the level where they'd understand the message? I'm
probably, given my interest in the world's linguistic diversity, I'm more excited by the grassroots and kind of spontaneously organized situations where communities have been translating health materials into their own languages, and with that into the most culturally appropriate forms, because emoji are kind of fun and jocular, and they work on the phones that we have access to and the internet that we have access to, but that's not the case for all cultures. And in a lot of cultures, you want to be persuading the elders to take sensible health preventative strategies because they're the ones that are going to influence the rest of the community. And so we've seen some amazing kind of grassroots, spontaneous work across different communities. And that's more exciting for me personally, I think.
Can you give me any examples of how that's happening? This is Yara, everyone.
Hi, Yara. I'm very much enjoying the babies and dogs, and I only had a garbage truck to offer before. It's kind of fun to see other people's houses in this way. Yara is a good dog. Some examples of that have been, there is a slightly unfortunately named viral languages, viral all languages mashup. It works better visually. And they're creating a kind of workflow for communities to take approved WHO materials and find ways of translating them that are culturally and linguistically appropriate. That's one group that I know of, but there are quite a lot of other communities, especially where you have, say, members of diasporas who are in the US or Australia are collaborating with family back home in different parts of the world to make sure that everyone's getting relevant information and trying to be as safe as possible.
Do you want to add anything to that, Jane?
I don't even remember the question right now because my baby was crying in the background and I was a little bit distracted. But yeah, I mean, what you were saying is that is to me more important than people joking about and making memes about the pandemic. Even though, I mean, obviously joking, making memes, it's a coping mechanism. It helps people process what they're going through. This is a very intense moment for the world. So, I mean, I understand it.
So maybe a follow-up question from me on that is linguists and lexicographers that I know of tend to get quite excited about big unstable events because they're generative of new words. And I'm just wondering what your take is on that in the case of the pandemic we're in now. Has it generated genuinely new words? We talked before about emojis and how two of the most popular ones were there for quite a while. But now we have words like COVIDiot and, well, we have ISO over here, which is a contraction of a word. But what generally happens to language when you do have people dealing with entirely new situations en masse?
I'm going to defer to the lexicographer on this question.
Oh, I mean, there's so much language that is coming from this moment. Sometimes it's really, really simple things that are happening to words that already exist, like mask. We're now seeing a definition that was not the primary definition of mask, medical masks, becoming so prevalent in a way that it wasn't before. So there are little things happening to words that already exist and that are very, very common, and suddenly you have a new definition, or you know, a less common definition that's becoming incredibly common. And so that's one thing. In terms of other words, I mean, some words we already talked about, like social distancing. I'd never heard that before the pandemic. Flatten the curve. I'd never heard that. Stay home, shelter in place. There's a shelter in place order in California, or at least in the county I live in, and I'd never heard shelter in place as a lexical item before. Something else interesting that's happening is there's a new way to refer to before the pandemic. So sometimes people will just say pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, but you'll also see more creative constructions like before times, or the before, or something like that. So it's, people are being creative with language because they're describing this whole new feeling. You know, it's very, very hard to get the words to describe what it is to be going through this right now. and so people, there is sort of like a before and after, because suddenly everything's shut down in a way that no one had ever seen in their lifetime. And suddenly people were being asked, you know, around the world, in the United States, to put people in their community's needs and the community as a whole above their own needs. So, I mean, it's just like this very, very unique time for our lifetimes. Another thing I'm seeing is, you know, going back to the playful use of language. At the beginning of the pandemic, not as much now, I was seeing people, I think it was like an intentional play on words, but instead of saying quarantine, people were referring to teenagers, sometimes themselves, as quarantines, like a mishearing of quarantine. And that's become this new noun. I've seen it in emoji form too. I don't know how much people are actually using it, but I have seen some of that. So there's creativity happening.
There's a cocktail in Melbourne called a quarantine as well.
Oh yeah, I've seen that
drinks
too.
Obviously what people are or would like to be drinking at bars or at home, it's certainly, that can in a sense be a playful extension of some of the services too.
Mm-hmm. So there's lots of words. I mean, I think for the people who are able to stay at home and are staying at home, there's a lot of self-reflection happening right now, you know, and not just because of the pandemic, also because of the systemic violence and inequality in the United States. And so I think, yeah, a lot of self-reflection turns into, how do I describe what I'm feeling into words? And sometimes people are bored and they want to make up puns or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, at first there was a very performing stay at home, a performative aspect to the stay at home online, with people making sourdough and like calling their drinks quarantini. I see less of that now.
And I think that speaks to the potential stickiness of some of these words, in that I think we've just lost Lawrie briefly while he relocates away from the puppy. I think the kind of long-term sticking power of these words in our vocabulary will really depend on how protracted this state of affairs is. The Spanish flu was circulating the globe for 3 or 4 years before it really quietened down, and you know, we don't have a whole lot of lexicon from that, and even the word Spanish flu is not really a correct reflection of its origins. So I always think about this when I go back and look at kind of words of the year from places like the American Dialect Society. You look at words of the year from 10 years ago and they seemed so pressing, and now you're just like, oh, I forgot about that. So I think if this becomes the new normal for us, then words like physical distancing might stay the course, and we might even convince the Americans to talk about ISO. But we'll see. This might just be a like, oh, remember 2020 kind of moment. It
seems hard to imagine. I guess part of the idea of this series was to look at, you know, like it started off as an idea about life after COVID, but one of the things that's become clearer now is that there's no quick way out of what we're experiencing. So we'll be living with this problem in whatever manifestation it takes locally for quite some time. And even if a vaccine's developed, the changes we're experiencing are going to be ongoing. So that to me suggests that with language as well, there's scope for there to be quite profound changes over time into how we use the tools of language, if you like. And we've got a question that relates to this a little bit from Emily, and I'll just maybe just remind people that they can type questions into the Q&A function. Facebook, Emily says, release quarantine care emojis specifically for people to use to support each other during isolation. But as I recall, there was a bit of a backlash with people criticising emojis for being useless, and a way for Mark Zuckerberg to say, he's doing his part without giving any money to the effort. Is this related to what you're saying about emojis being related to whimsy, playfulness, and softening in a conversation, and people feeling this is inappropriate right now to be bringing in things like care emojis?
For people like me who are not on Facebook that much, the other two people on here, Facebook have a little react G, which is a person hugging a heart, which is to convey, I care about you. I guess it's something more cozy than just a straight up heart. Like, it's not a part of the emoji set that Unicode have at this point. And I think it's just part of our evolving vocabulary of how we interact online. One thing that video isn't great at, but it's better than written communication, is that we can do back channeling. So Lawrie has kindly nodded to show a kind of support for what I'm saying, or that he's at least pretending to listen. That's really hard to, you're doing a great job, Lawrie, thank you. That's really hard to convey in the written form. And so that's why, you know, the nice thing is that it solves a communication gap in written communication that I find interesting as a linguist. And I, like you, Emily, maybe have some slightly more cynical feelings about it as a tool of a tech company to keep you on their platform. Jane, I don't know, are you care emojiing at people at this time?
I think so. I think the heart emoji in general can be used in these showing support senses. So sometimes you'll see the heart emoji, like if someone is like, let's say someone has died, you might end your message with a heart emoji to say, I'm showing support. And it's more of a sincere use. It's a very earnest use of emoji. So it is possible to use emoji in a way that is more serious and can fit into these very somber contexts too.
Can I just move on to another topic I was keen to talk to both of you about today, and that is the actual format we're in now, the Zoom situation. Lauren, you hinted at that before, saying I was nodding when you said something. And I guess I'm now very used to using Zoom. I happen to really enjoy this particular format, doing something where what might have been 6 months ago, a seminar we did in a room in the library at La Trobe Uni for people on campus. We can now invite Jane to be part of this. We've got an international audience. It's fantastic. But I'm interested in what, there's been a lot of articles lately on Zoom fatigue. And I certainly do feel if I've been in 7 or 8 Zoom meetings in a day that I'm much more tired than if I've been in meetings face to face. How much is this tied up to the way we communicate, and what are some of the things that you've noticed about how people are trying to deal with this?
I work with how people use gesture in mostly face-to-face conversation. And in the gesture literature, there's a whole bunch of experiment types where they basically induce fatigue and effort in people's brains by feeding their audio back to them on a slight delay, or slightly mismatching people's voice and video when they talk. And this is shown that it shows that it makes conversation more difficult for people. And so Zoom is like an experiment designed to make you tired. So it's not surprising that we find it tiring. It's much more for us to process and much less high quality information about how our interactants feel. I mean, it's amazing that we can manage conversation at a distance. It's something we didn't even have the basic technology to do a couple of centuries ago. And it shows how adaptive humans are with language.
Yeah, I find it more tiring actually dealing with my family on Zoom. And I use this dealing with without, I didn't mean to say dealing with because, communicating, but my mum's 85 and for her, it's quite a struggle to feel confident in a format like this. And then there's, the attempt to extend the format by, carrying the device around the house so she can check in on X, Y, and Z. So in some ways to me, that social dimension, this is just my personal experience, is more difficult. And the same goes for Zoom catch-ups with friends, groups of people. So I actually find that it inhibits conversation. Now, if I want to really talk to someone, I'll ask if I can phone them as a sort of sign of intimacy, which I never used to think of the phone like that. But to me, it seems to, in some ways, get around some of the fatigue I get from using Zoom in social situations.
I would say another thing that causes fatigue in these like video call situations is that you're on video. And whenever I'm on video, I'm like, what do I do with my hands? Like, what's my face supposed to be doing? And
I've just lost your image there, which
that was because my sister was calling me and it went to that. I thought I put it on Do Not Disturb. Anyway, this is the exact
perfect example.
Yeah, that's an example of an interruption that can happen.
Thanks for staging that for us.
That was staged. I said, please call me during this. But yeah, you can become very self-conscious about like, what are the hand gestures I usually use in this situation? You can hide your own video and that can help, but that could be another kind of exhaustion. Another thing, like, was it yesterday? I don't even know what day it is. On Sunday, yeah, it was yesterday. For me, Sunday, it was my dad's 75th birthday and we had a family Zoom call, and to tell him what we were getting him, I made a slide presentation. Like I made the kind of thing I would have given at a work meeting. And I like spent a lot of time putting it together, and
so cute.
And it was suddenly you're taking all this effort to talk to people when if you were all in the same place, you could just say, here's what we're getting you. Happy birthday. And yeah, also just looking like it's not normal in conversations to constantly be staring at people's faces into their eyes. That's, oftentimes when I'm in person at a meeting, I'll be looking away, writing stuff down, not holding the gaze the entire time. So that can be very exhausting. I mean, I can see it in, like, I have a 3-month-old baby, and when he looks in the mirror, he can only look at himself for so long before he turns away, because it's very exhausting, and I think that it's socially very awkward to do that. I mean, this is lovely, but yeah, it can be very exhausting.
Yeah. So we've got a comment from Emanuela who says, so the less formal the context, the more fatigue.
I think formality is one dimension. I think one thing that is helping with fatigue here is that we're all working to a cultural script we've created where Lawrie is our host. We're letting him do a lot of the heavy lifting and signposting, and all the people without their cameras on can be very relaxed about their role in the interaction, far more relaxed than you would be if we were in a seminar room together. I find it quite relaxing to be able to join a seminar while also folding, washing, or having lunch. So I think it's like formality is one dimension, but it's about expectations. The most relaxing video chat that I do is with my sister who lives in another city. And because it's so open-ended and we don't really have anything to achieve in these interactions besides her hanging out with my toddler and my kid showing her all the new tricks that she has. I'll spend twice as long on a chat with her as anyone else, because it's not about formality, it's about expectations there.
Does that come down a bit to the fact that one of the things we're missing out on by not seeing people physically is literally just hanging out, that you might go for a walk with someone or, you know, have a drink or a pizza, and you're not necessarily exchanging a lot of words in what might be still an intensely social encounter. So that when the technology's on, you've got to, in a sense, turbocharge every element of that, or it really doesn't work.
And it's, from my experience, because my experience in this pandemic has been experience of like a new first-time mom, trying to have a 0 to 3 month old be on video calls with grandparents who are very, very sad that they can't be in person with the baby, you know, like that's incredibly hard. I mean, I want to show them, I want them to hold, you know, their grandkid, and I want them to be able to see him smile, but yeah, but it's so hard to capture his smiles in videos or in calls because he's like, what is that thing in my face? So if he's smiling, it's because we're like really focused on him and interacting with him. So that's something that is definitely lost. Babies aren't very good. Very young babies aren't very good at video calls.
Yeah, and the other end of the family continuum is that it's really weird for me to call my grandmother, because a lot of our time is spent together sitting, just kind of hanging out and drinking tea, and you know, her hearing aids don't always work the best on the phone or in person. But you know, we'll go spend a couple of hours and she'll watch the kid hang out, and we'll just kind of sit there companionably, and that doesn't easily translate to this kind of interaction.
Yeah. Maybe another question now, swinging back to emojis for a moment, from Deputy, and the question is to you, Lauren. It's that emojis are definitely a great tool for communication, but there are also chances of miscommunication since emojis are limited to a certain extent. How would you address that?
Thanks, Deep Jody. That is a question that kind of intersects with my research interests, in that there's always potential for miscommunication. And when we're online, we don't have that back channeling and feedback to constantly monitor each other and check that the other person is getting the message. I think emoji are particularly difficult because they are very culturally specific in their meaning, and they're very contextually flexible. Like Jane said, hearts can be used really earnestly, and I spend a lot of time stressing about what color heart to send people in my interactions, but I also use them very flippantly or decoratively. And so it's that flexibility that makes them so great to use. And it's part of why I kind of have an ongoing research program that looks at how they're very similar to gesture, because gestures are very flexible and context dependent. But then that does open up the potential for miscommunication between someone who's using the heart to show solidarity and the other person thinks that they're using it romantically. So yeah, definitely ongoing cultural evolution of use there.
Yeah. What do you think is good about the way we're communicating now online, that let's say that in a few months' time, we could go back to something like the way we were living before? Is there anything that's happened during this pandemic in terms of communication that you'd like to take back into the world after? And I mean by the world after, the world we're happy and thriving in, or in some senses, you know, the world of 2019. So just to avoid any confusion.
I would say there's this flattening that's happening where for me to talk to a friend in the city I live in Oakland, is the same effort now as for me to talk to a friend anywhere in the world. And yes, technology has made talking to people all over the world a lot more accessible, but when you have the option of seeing people in person or going for a walk or whatever it is, with a friend, sometimes that is what you do more, and those are the people you think about more. And now I'm finding that I'm thinking about people who are all over the world, who I'm friends with in a different way, and reaching out to them and talking to them more than I might if I were distracted by lots of things going on socially in person. So that's something to carry on.
What about you, Lauren?
I think the exciting thing for me has been the emergence of business casual online interactions, people figuring out that you can actually maintain a workplace and that workplace can have a social culture, and that doesn't have to involve everyone commuting all the time. I'm very, academia is a precarious employment, but I'm very glad that I'm not in corporate real estate at the moment, because I think a lot of businesses are beginning to see that actually there is a lot of power in a well-structured online social workplace culture. And I'd like to see that continue for all my family and friends who've regained hours out of their work week from not having to commute all the time. I hope we can, I'm very enthusiastic about returning to campus and returning to face-to-face teaching, but I also hope there's a more compassionate and thoughtful understanding about why we are working where we are working. And online communication has really shown that can be a thoughtful discussion.
Do you think students are finding this as well in the case of universities?
I'm in awe of our students last semester and next semester. The extra effort involved in engaging in content when you also have to put in extra effort to just engage at all is a big thing. And students who've made it through this semester, I'm so proud of them. I hope they're proud of themselves. And I think it's all happened very quickly. I hope we can evolve some more thoughtful ways of dealing with online communication in class-based situations. I think there'll be some interesting developments that come out of that.
Jane, what about you?
Oh, sorry.
What about you? Yeah.
Oh, I think if you're studying a subject that can easily be studied virtually, that by going to lectures and reading and absorbing the material that way, it's one thing. But if you're like studying science and you need to be there for a lab, that's got to be a huge hurdle right now. And I'm not exactly sure how universities are dealing with that, because I'm so far out of academia, but that seems like a much more difficult thing to solve.
Do you think people are, the point that Lauren made before, I'm wondering if you think it's true in the US as well, that in a sense, certainly the way people dress, but also the fact that people are talking to each other. The term working from home is problematic to me, because we're at home where we're also doing work. But do you feel the same way that Lauren does, that it has made workplaces in the States less formal for people who can actually do their jobs from home?
I mean, there's definitely, you get to see how people are living. You get to see, their homes behind you and their families, sometimes, or pets, sometimes coming into the screen, or you could hear them. So it's a different level of formality than just in an office, when you might never know about people's lives, and you certainly wouldn't see it in that way. So I think that's happening across the board, really. But then you also see these social situations that are outside of work becoming more formal. So if you're in like a Zoom chat with like 5 people, sometimes it helps to have someone moderate and call on people so you're not all talking over each other. And that, I mean, for me, that's really exhausting. I'm really looking forward to that not happening anymore.
Yeah, my book club has become far more freewheeling than it used to be.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel quite strongly that that's where I definitely, you know, really want the restrictions to ease and for it to be easier to be with people face to face and situationally, and especially with you know, the younger members of the extended family as well, like nephews and friends and their kids as well, because it is really difficult that quite often when you're friends with a family, you're only able really in a Zoom context able to really talk to one or two members of the family properly at a time. And it seems to privilege the generation you're in and exclude people who are younger and or in some cases older as well. Just from a research point of view, what do you think lexicographers, linguists are going to be studying in years to come, other than the things we've talked about today? What are they going to be studying and researching about this time and about what it means for the discipline?
Well, I think one of the things Lauren brought up earlier was, are these neologisms going to stick around after we're no longer in a pandemic, after there's, you know, a vaccine? And so that's something that lexicographers are very interested in. Are these words that are going to just be here for this moment, or are they going to have a more long-term relevance? Either way, I think that I personally like learning about things and these words and studying them, because even if they're no longer used, it's a relic of this time we're in, and this is a very, very, you know, hugely important time in all of our lives. Like, we'll all look back to, we'll remember this year or years. This is hopefully a once in a lifetime event.
Should we all be
who knows?
Should we all be recording our Zoom conversations and playing them back as a sort of nostalgia trip in a few years' time?
Well, I
think
that speaks to the fact that this is a really unique situation, in that we have a unique situation in the history of human language, not in its future, in that we have an overabundance of informal language. You know, there were possibly the equivalents of the Covidiots and Quasar. Jane, you'll be horrified to know quarantine has also been shortened here.
I'm not horrified.
Tight words I don't know why I said horrified. That was very presumptive. But, you know, there could have been all of these words during the 1918 Spanish flu that were just far more ephemeral and less documented because they were in private letters or conversations, whereas we have Twitter feeds and people's Facebook pages, which are creating a very different kind of record for us to look at. As a linguist, but also a linguistics communicator and a science communicator, one thing I think we'll be looking back on in this period is how effectively, or where we failed to really communicate critically important scientific knowledge to the general population, and the fact that we seem to have countries where people were clearly communicated to and acted well on that information, and then we have countries where things were not communicated well, and you have this slightly surreal situation where, you know, the German response was based largely on American data, but it was not implemented in America, and you have two very different trajectories for what's subsequently happened. So I think a thing to watch as well.
Yeah, in the United States, the whole concept of wearing a mask, the practice of wearing a mask, has taken on political tones. Unfortunately, it's gone out of the health realm and into politics. I mean, the same thing with climate change. It's gone out of science and into politics, regardless of facts and lives. So that's something that's it's very disturbing. And the concept of like freedom in America, in the United States, is tied to the wearing of masks, and that's a particularly difficult thing to see when so many people are dying here, and when you look at the people who are dying, people who are people of color are dying at disproportionate rates. So it's incredibly upsetting right now in the U.S. to see how things have been communicated, how all this was optional or not a big deal, and people are taking those words seriously.
There's some very immediate and real world effects from how science is positioned and how it's communicated and how it fits within larger cultural conversations.
And we're now broadening out into what could become, I hope, the whole series that we're looking to do here at La Trobe Uni on COVID and how it's affecting our lives in the longer term. Today's just been a fascinating discussion. Jane Solomon, Lauren Gawne, I'd like to thank you both so much for being part of it. I'd like to thank our audience, wherever you are, for being part of our discussion as well, and wish you all the best. And I'm trying to say that in a way where I'm not being too self-conscious. Does that sound like, referencing back the earlier part of our discussion? But I'll stick with that. I'd like to wish you both all the best, and to thank everyone who's taken part in today's seminar. And I'll finish off by saying good afternoon if you're in Australia, good evening if you're in California, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.